The U.S. oil industry used to be one of the world's most powerful oil price setters. In its heyday, the considerable clout of the U.S. shale industry could increase or decrease production at will, effectively stripping OPEC of much of its price-setting power. But the pandemic and some fiscal irresponsibility has changed all that. The United States is still an oil production powerhouse, producing more than 11 million barrels per day of crude oil that is used both domestically and exported. It remains the world's largest oil producer. But power in the oil industry doesn't necessarily come from sheer production figures alone. Spare capacity, which translates into the ability of an oil producer to ratchet oil production up or down in response to demand, has a profound effect on prices. But there is another factor that is equally as profound: being able to use that spare capacity. Before the pandemic hit, the U.S. shale industry was heavily criticized for its fiscal irresponsibility and pump-at-will policy. While OPEC was struggling to curb production, U.S. shale continued to pump, keeping prices lower. The game of chicken was on. At the time, public oil companies were using their profits to reinvest in additional drilling, and many found themselves heavily in debt. Alongside the pandemic, the U.S. shale industry was then sucker-punched with the ESG movement, and banks began to restrict lending to dirty fossil fuels. Investors ultimately demanded spending restraint. Combined, these things put an end to U.S. oil's spending spree, and therefore its ability to take advantage of high oil prices. It also returned much of the power to OPEC, power that it had given up to U.S. shale when it stormed onto the scene. U.S. shale isn't dead, not by a long shot, but it certainly doesn't have the same market power that it once used to. OPEC, together with Russia and its allies, once again sit atop the oil price throne.